Hello and welcome to another episode of the Tired F1 Pod. This time we're doing telemetry again. And what a session to do it on. The Emilia Romagna Grand Prix 2024 qualifying was a sizzler. What do you think of it, Ammar?
Oh, it really was. It had all kinds of surprises. It looks like there's a five-way fight at the top, right? And so it's exciting, and I can't wait to see what you have to unveil to all of us.
Yeah, I mean, for the first time in ages, it really looked like Max was going to be under threat. His FP1 and FP2 performances weren't brilliant. The car just wasn't underneath him. And in FP3, he didn't even get to have a proper run at it. And yet, Max equals Thanos. He is inevitable. That was incredible. I have no idea where that came from. But we're going to have a little go and see where it did come from. We're going to look at Max versus Oscar. So Oscar, in the end, got a three-place grid penalty for impeding Kevin Magnussen, but actually he was the closest to Max. And there's an argument here to say that perhaps Max was a little bit lucky, and Oscar maybe should have got pole. So we're going to look through the data and see how close that actually was. So here we go. Here's the entire telemetry trace for the entire lap. These are the fastest laps in quali 3 for Max in blue and Oscar in papaya. And as usual, we've got our usual traces. So at the top, we've got speed. Underneath that, we've got the delta. And again, the delta, the blue line is Max because Max had the fastest lap. Oscar's time, his difference to Max, is represented above or below that benchmark line. Okay, so if Oscar's line is above the blue line, it means he is slower. And if Oscar's line is below the blue line, it means he is faster. And then underneath that, we've got the throttle and brake traces. Across the x-axis, the horizontal axis, we've got the distance across the track. So we're starting at the beginning of the lap and finishing at the end of the lap, as you'd expect. And the first thing I really want to have a look at here is the delta. So if you look at the delta, you can see that it kind of looks a little bit like Tabletop Mountain in Cape Town. Can you see that? So it starts off with a gentle delta away from the blue line for Oscar. So he's obviously a little bit slower in that first part of the lap. But then it plateaus out for the majority of the lap. And then right at the end of the lap, Oscar starts to come back down and is quicker than Max right at the end, getting really close to that blue line. If we take a little bit of a closer look at the split times, you can see how that played out. So in the first sector, where Oscar's slowly getting further away from Max's time, you can see that he was about 0.2 slower in that sector alone. So Max pulled a purple sector there. And despite Oscar coming back with a purple sector of his own in sector 2, it was only 1,000th quicker than what Max achieved. And it wasn't enough to pull it back. But it was in the final sector where Oscar really started to make a difference. And although he didn't have the fastest sector of anyone, that was Lando, it was enough to give him another 1/10.5 advantage over Max. But overall, he missed out on pole by 7/100ths of a second. And it looks to me like a lot of that happened in the first sector. So let's have a look at the first sector. So here we go. Here's the first sector. And immediately, the thing that's striking to me is that when we come out of the start-finish straight and we end up on the entry for Tamburello, which is arrowed here, you can see that Max has far greater end of straight speed than Oscar does, right? You see how that's on the speed trace, the blue line is clearly above the orange line. That means he's got better end of straight speed. Max brakes a little bit later for both Tamburello and then the Villeneuve chicane. Villeneuve chicane is arrowed now. And you can see just at the exit of Tamburello, he has a little wobble. You can see the throttle trace. He has a little lift of the throttle. You can see where it wobbles at the exit, where Oscar's has a smooth curve. Max has to lift a little bit. And I wonder if he just lost a little bit of time on the exit of Tamburello. But what's really interesting to see here is how Oscar goes about his driving. And I think this is a hallmark of how Oscar does a lap. He's super smooth, like super smooth. And you can see it, especially in and out of Tamburello. So you can see how there's just one throttle off. So he comes off the throttle and he's off it. And then when he comes back on again, you can see that lovely smooth curve on the exit of Tamburello. Right at the point where Max is lifting a little bit, he's got a lovely little smooth curve. If you have a little look at this clip, you can see Oscar going into the final chicane in Japan. Just look at his hands. Look how smooth they are. One move in, one move out. And if you haven't already, have a look at our video looking at Charles' Miami qualifying lap. And we've put in a little clip of what he does when he turns into a corner. It's much more aggressive. It's a move and then a big move. And that's completely different to what Oscar's doing here, where it's just one smooth move in, one smooth move out. And I think it takes a lot of anticipation to know when to brake, when to come off the throttle, when to apply it again, so that it's exactly right. So you're not having to lift or change or anything. You can just apply the throttle once. It's the nirvana that all drivers are trying to chase, but it's very rare for anyone to actually achieve that. The only other person I've seen do that regularly is one Jay Button, Esquire. He was pretty good at this, wasn't he?
I was going to say Oscar drives like a very fast Jensen Button, but
a very fast Jensen Button. That's right. That's right. So we spend the rest of the lap pretty much in status quo. Oscar stays pretty far away from Max. That advantage that that Max has built up in the first sector, he doesn't really lose it until right at the end. So let's have a little look at this. So this is sector 3. And the sector starts with the chicane at the top of the hill, Variante Alta. What a lovely name. Oscar's a little earlier coming off the throttle here, but he's also much quicker in picking it up again. And again, that anticipation to know when to come off the throttle and when to come back on the throttle again is really evident here. And it gives him a little advantage going back down the hill towards Ravazza. And he's faster into the first Ravazza compared to Max. But the big gain where he really makes up time is out of Ravazza 2. He's much less heavy on the braking, so he has a quick stab of the brakes, whereas Max is much more deliberate. You can see that here. And again, on the exit, he's super smooth. So here it's even more evident because Max and Oscar's traces, their throttle traces are overlapping here. You can see it. Oscar has a nice straight line, whereas you can see how Max is a little bit wavy. It deviates from that perfect throttle application. And it means that Oscar is gaining on him. And you can see that on the speed trace, his line is above Max's. And that carries through right to the end of the lap, where although Oscar isn't quite able to catch Max's time, it's close enough that he gets it to under a tenth. And I want to have another look at sector 1 and why Max had such a great sector 1. Have a look at this. So here he is going down the start-finish straight, and there's a little speck in front of him. That speck is Nico Hülkenberg. And Max very astutely places his car just behind Nico all the way up to the entry point for Tamburello. That, my friend, is what we call a slipstream. And I'm pretty sure Pole was not on without that slipstream.
Yeah, I saw other analysis that says that he gained about another 10 kph. I'm not sure if that's entirely accurate, but I think you're right. I mean, even without the data, right? If you look at just the pure visuals, when he got to the chicane, it looked like he had to downshift even more because he was just carrying so much speed in there that it almost went wrong, right? He was coming in so hot and fast, but kudos to Max for recognizing that, and Red Bull, by the way, for planning it to whatever extent that they were able to.
Absolutely.
And then that's also just Max being Max. I think you're right. I think. Yeah, pole doesn't happen without that.
That even in a session where where the Red Bull wasn't quite on it, Max was able to get the lap. And I think that's the big takeaway for me from this, that this was a day where Max made the difference. And anyone that goes around saying that he's a Newey merchant, I've heard that one, or that he can only drive the fastest car and he's winning because of that. Yeah, there are certain instances where that's true. Miami was a good one, but this was not one of those cases. This was Max making all of the difference. This is where Max turned around and says to Red Bull, Adrian Newey is not your greatest asset. I am. There you go. And on that bombshell, I think it's time to call it a day. We will be back after the race for a full review. If you like these videos, please like, subscribe, leave us a comment, leave us some suggestions. We read all of them. We reply to as many as we can. We'll see you tomorrow.